China has just snatched a massive LNG deal worth $2.4 billion, moving it from the U.S. to Australia due to the ongoing trade war with the United States after Trump escalated the situation with additional tariffs. That's a huge loss for America, but it gets worse. China is now stepping in to rescue Canada's struggling oil industry. And if it takes control of the supply, the U.S. could lose its grip on Canada too. That means Canada might finally break free from American political pressure. But here's the real danger. Is China quietly building an energy empire that could one day rival America's global dominance? And what happens if countries like Canada and Australia start following China's rules instead of America's? Stick around. This power shift might just change the world forever. Before we proceed, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss great analysis like this. In March 2025, the global energy industry was shaken when China suddenly stopped buying liquefied natural gas, LNG, from the United States. This decision came after a new wave of trade tensions between the two nations. The U.S. had earlier imposed fresh tariffs on Chinese goods, and in retaliation, Beijing slapped a 15% tariff on U.S. LNG. What followed was the longest halt in Chinese LNG imports from America since June 2023, lasting more than 40 days. This wasn't just a regular trade conflict. It rocked the global energy market. The U.S. had become the world's largest LNG exporter in 2024, sending out nearly 12 billion cubic feet of gas per day. It served key markets across Europe and Asia, including France, the Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, and India. China was a major part of this business, regularly importing over 400,000 tons of LNG per month from American suppliers. For years, the U.S. China LNG relationship was seen as a growing partnership, one that helped the U.S. economy and gave China access to reliable energy. But the sudden break in this trade link exposed how quickly alliances can unravel when politics enters the energy game. But China didn't just sit back after the break. Instead, it quickly started to look elsewhere for energy. One of its most significant moves was signing a 15-year LNG deal with Australia's Woodside Energy in March 2025. This marked the first long-term agreement between a Chinese company and an Australian LNG producer in several years. It showed China's strategy to spread out its energy risks and avoid depending too much on one supplier, especially a supplier like the U.S., which could be influenced by political decisions. This deal also showed that China is preparing for a long-term energy competition, not just a temporary trade fight. While some earlier reports suggested that China had started redirecting its LNG supplies toward Europe, this turned out to be misleading. In truth, Europe and China have separate energy goals, and there is no clear evidence that Chinese LNG was flowing into European ports. However, the situation still benefited Europe in another way. Since 2022, when the war in Ukraine pushed Europe to cut ties with Russian gas, the continent has been investing heavily in new energy sources. Countries like Finland have launched new LNG terminals, like the one at Inkoo, which began operations in January 2023, to expand their import capacity. Europe has been buying more LNG from the U.S., and any excess supply left by China's exit from the U.S. market may have helped keep prices down for European buyers. But back in the U.S., the energy sector faced serious challenges. Companies that had counted on China as a reliable customer were left with too much gas and not enough demand. Prices for American LNG dropped, and major exporters like Cheniere Energy and Tellurian saw their stock values take a hit. The U.S. Department of Energy reported that total LNG exports for the first 9 months of 2024 had reached 3.2 trillion cubic feet, with around half going to Europe. Now with China gone, American gas producers are looking for new markets to avoid oversupply and falling prices. The bigger concern here is what this means for U.S. influence. For years, the U.S. used its energy exports not just for business, but also as a foreign policy tool. Supplying allies with gas gave Washington power in diplomatic talks and helped build international partnerships. But the break with China shows that this power can quickly weaken if countries decide to go elsewhere. It's a warning sign that in today's world, Energy deals are no longer safe from politics. They are part of the political game. China's break from the U.S. LNG is not just a short-term trade argument. It could mark the start of a larger shift where energy is used as a weapon in global politics. Just like oil defined power in the 20th century, LNG could be at the center of international strategy in the 21st. This is no longer just about money or contracts. It's about trust, control, and global influence. And if this is just the first move, what will the next one look like? The recent changes in global energy markets have caused serious concerns, especially when it comes to the United States' position as a top exporter of liquefied natural gas. What's happening in Europe makes this situation even worse. Back during his first term, Trump waged a campaign to wean Europe off Russian gas and tie it closer to U.S. energy.
Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year.
He pushed European countries to switch to the U.S. LNG, which is more expensive but seen as more politically reliable. Europe agreed, especially after the war in Ukraine made Russian gas too risky. But that strategy is crumbling fast, and Europe is quietly turning back to its old suppliers. That deal now seems to be falling apart. In early 2025, Europe was still a big buyer of American LNG. U.S. LNG made up about 48% of all LNG imported by the European Union in the first half of last year. That's equal to about 10.5 billion euros. But this was a 15% drop compared to the same period the year before. It shows that Europe is slowly cutting back on how much LNG it buys from the U.S. There are growing signs that this decline will continue. One of the biggest reasons is the rising trade tension between the U.S. and its trading partners. The Trump administration took tough stances on trade, which caused several countries to react with their own tariffs. In particular, China has hit back by putting a 15% tariff on LNG from the U.S. This makes American LNG less competitive and more expensive compared to gas from Qatar, Russia, or Australia. Europe hasn't imposed direct tariffs yet, but the growing tension is making European governments think twice. They are now looking at other options. Surprisingly, even after trying to move away from Russian energy, European countries like France, Spain, and Belgium increased their imports of Russian LNG by 11% in the first half of last year, and this could happen again in 2025. This shows that when it comes to energy, price and availability often win over politics. European countries are also working to build more renewable energy sources and are signing deals with countries like Algeria, Norway, and Azerbaijan to meet their future gas needs. All of this is causing deep problems for the U.S. energy industry. When export terminals are underused, it leads to big financial losses. Running a gas terminal is extremely expensive, and without steady international buyers, these terminals can't survive for long. If Europe continues to back away from U.S. LNG, and if China keeps its distance, American gas producers may be forced to cut back production, lay off workers, or even shut down some facilities. These developments raise serious questions about the future of U.S. energy leadership in the world. The U.S. used to be a reliable energy supplier for many major countries, but now it risks becoming a less important player. This is not just an economic problem. It could also reduce America's power in world politics, where energy has always played a major role. To stop this slide, the U.S. will need to rethink its entire strategy. That means working harder to repair trade relationships, offering better deals, and investing in new technology that can lower the cost of LNG. It may also mean being more flexible and cooperative on global climate and energy goals. Without big changes, America's fall from energy dominance could continue at full speed. Meanwhile, America is in trouble with Canada too. For many years, Canada and the United States had a close and steady energy relationship. Canada, rich in oil and natural gas, sent most of its oil south to the U.S., and the U.S. depended on this supply. But this partnership is now changing fast. In a move that backfired spectacularly, Washington proposed a 10% tax on Canadian oil and gas. That pushed Canada to look elsewhere. The U.S. seemed confident that Canada had no choice but to keep sending oil south. After all, Canada doesn't have many big ports and has mostly relied on pipelines that go through the U.S. But today's world is very different. Countries want more choices in where they send and buy energy. So, when the U.S. showed signs of making trade harder, China took advantage of the moment. China sent Rongsheng Petrochemical, a giant oil company, to Calgary, the center of Canada's oil industry, and began building strong business connections. Soon, Canadian oil started moving east, toward Asia, instead of going south to America. The numbers tell the story clearly. Until recently, 97% of Canadian oil exports went to the United States. This meant Canada's energy income and jobs depended heavily on U.S. demand and decisions. If the U.S. changed rules or added taxes, Canada would lose a lot. But that's not the case anymore. In 2024, major Canadian companies like Suncor, Shell, and BP began signing FOB-free on-board oil deals with China. Under these deals, the oil is sold in Canada and China handles the shipping. This gives Canada more control, and the oil doesn't need to go through the U.S. at all. But the biggest game changer was the Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX pipeline, which was finished in 2024. This project cost about $34 billion and increased how much oil could move from Alberta to the Pacific coast. Before the expansion, the pipeline could carry 300,000 barrels per day. Now it can carry 890,000 barrels per day. That's nearly 3 times more. More importantly, it connects Canada's oil supply directly to British Columbia's coast, which means oil can now be sent straight to countries like China and India without going through the U.S. This pipeline changed everything. Now Canada is no longer stuck depending on the United States. Oil tankers can leave Canada's west coast and travel directly to Asian markets. This gives Canada new power in global energy markets. It also helps China, which wants more stable and reliable energy partners. For Canada, this is a major step forward, from being a quiet supplier to the U.S. to becoming an independent energy player on the world stage. But with new power comes new risks. China's deep involvement in Canada's oil industry brings up big questions. Right now, Canada seems to have the upper hand. But in the future, could China start to control prices or influence Canadian policies? Could Canada become too dependent on China, just like it once was with the U.S.? These are serious concerns. Also, there are also big environmental worries. Many indigenous communities, environmentalists, and scientists have spoken out against the TMX pipeline. They worry about possible oil spills, damage to forests, and rising carbon emissions. While sending more oil to Asia may help Canada's economy, it could also hurt the environment and break Canada's climate promises. As Canada gains power and energy, it also faces more pressure to act responsibly on the global stage. The United States should be very concerned. It may have believed Canada had no other option. But now, Canada has shown that it can choose new trade partners and build new routes. The U.S. has not only lost some energy security, but also part of its influence in North America. And China has gained, not just more oil, but also a stronger presence in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. hasn't just lost energy security. It may have lost Canada as a trusted ally. A nation it once called its backyard is now opening the front door to China. And Beijing? It's not just buying oil, it's buying influence. The real question now is, if America keeps losing its energy allies one by one, who will stand with it when the next crisis comes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this analysis eye-opening, hit that like button and subscribe for more global economy insights. See you in the next one.